Okay. All right. Oh, sorry guys. Was just waiting for the stream to start, catching everything that I say. All right, so let's begin. So big news today. First ban from Square Enix and Hobby Japan for the Final Fantasy trading card game, and I feel like it's rightfully so. The reason being is that, well, I guess I'll go about the reason why after I kind of give you a little bit of a TLDR. Too long didn't read. So there's going to be some bans coming out, and it's going to be effective starting December 1st. And the ban cards are, well, Thaumaturge and Gesper. So if you're looking for the link in order to figure out, to kind of read all about it, feel free to check out the link that I'll be putting down below the YouTube video. I'm not going to put it on the Twitch channel because, well, sorry, but Twitch is kind of, hold on, sorry, forgot to put on the chat. Okay, so, not sure how that works. All right, there we go. All right, so if you want to chat, feel free to do so. I'm definitely available to discuss this, and I'm open to hearing other people's decision and opinions on the matter, as Facebook has kind of been blowing up about this since the announcement came out this morning. The two ban cards being Gesper and Thaumaturge, two of the key cards for the Turbo Discard deck, and we've showcased it at least once or twice in deck tech videos. It came out at the tail end of Opus 5. I think the first time I've personally seen it was in Singapore. I wasn't in Singapore, but I watched the stream, and the deck is quite devastating. The deck that took it out was some version of Mono Earth EX Burst, and that was able to take it out, but that is definitely a deck that caters heavily to taking on very aggressive decks. So it made full use of EX Burst in order to counter the fact that it's too hard for you to actually play out answers. Some of the reasons being for this, as you read the site, for the reasons why the design team, the producers, went ahead and put out a ban list. So they're low cost. They're discarding cards from opponents' hands. Gesper is able to do it every single turn, and you can play both multiples of both in your deck and put them on the field, because they actually have that little multi-card symbol here, and that made it so that normally if you have something like a unique character, whether it's a monster, like you only really need one Gesper out. But for Thaumaturge, one of the problems that came up with it was that before, people used to use Argeth. Let me look up the card for you in case Argeth. Is that how we spell it? Nope. I'm horrible at spelling these names. Okay, Argeth. So this little guy, right? 2-drop, 3,000 power. Discard a card from your opponent's hand. Seems quite close to Thaumaturge, right? But something to keep in mind that I think Chris Adams pointed out in our video when I actually didn't catch it at first, is that little symbol right here, multi-card. That makes such a big difference, because turn 1, let's say you get one of the god hands that people discuss, is that if you play three Thaumaturges in your hand and you play first, you now have 3 forwards. Your opponent starts off with 3 cards less. Even going second, drawing 2 cards. On their turn, they will only have 4 cards in their hand, so that makes things very difficult. And with that much pressure from 3 forwards being out in play, you can take him out in 3 turns if you don't even play another forward the following turn somehow, like another 2-drop or something like that. And it was just devastating. And you would actually watch other people, how meta-defining it was that you would test out a deck, and if you couldn't at least go 50% against Turbo Discard, then you would just throw that deck out the window, and you're like, nope, that's not going to work, and then you just go back to the drawing board. And even decks that specifically cater to taking on Turbo Discard didn't always win against Turbo Discard. I mean, they dedicated over half a deck to just sticking it on, and that wasn't 100% effective, anything like that. Not even like 75. Well, not sure about 75, but it was not always easy to beat Turbo Discard, because even if you put out the forward that could take it on, it wasn't always a given that you would be able to take out the 3 Thaumaturges. And on top of that, they had other cards like let's see, Sid. I don't remember how to do the whole thing. Okay, Sid Alstein. So if they were able to eventually, like, if you put a roadblock against them, and they got a Jesper out and they started kind of going at your hand, eventually, if you had no cards in hand from either playing what you thought or what you use for answers, whether you put on maybe backups, forwards, anything like that to kind of take on all the small forwards out there. I mean, if you ever went without any cards in your hand and passed the turn to your opponent, they could always play a Sid Alstein and break that forward and then just keep going to town and just finish you off. On top of the fact that, I mean, Genesis was still a card, is still a card, also available in the Villains and Heroes deck, the 2-player deck that came out. You could get 3 copies of them in that deck. And if you put a forward out, they could just play a Genesis, they'll freeze it, and just keep going to town. It was not easy to take on Turbo Discard. And it also turned a lot of players, new players, away from the game. I mean, resource denial, especially when it comes to not even having that card in your hand. So it's one thing to say something like a spell gets countered. Okay, so let's say, for example, you have, don't see it very often, but Carbuncle, is that how you spell it? Yep. So if your opponent, for example, plays a summon and you play Carbuncle, and I mean, at least that's a counterplay. Like, you had to have that card in hand to stop them from doing it. But in terms of what Turbo Discard did, was that it forced you to top deck from turn 1 in order to have the right answer against Turbo Discard, or hopefully flip an EX Burst. And after that, even if you put a backup out or something like that, like turn after turn, you would go with only like 2 or 3 cards in hand. And if you didn't have the right answer, like just right there, you just drew it right now, like they would force another discard out of your hand from taking a hit from a Genesis or a Jesper activation. I mean, it was just really tough to take on that deck. So people are wondering, like, why is it bad? Why was there a bad list and everything? And why didn't they just print something in Opus 7? So some people thought, like, you know what, let's take it easy, let's step back, let's look at what's going to happen with Turbo Discard showing up at the end of Opus 5. And through all of Opus 6, people have been racking their brains at putting a deck together that doesn't just take on Turbo Discard, but could do okay against other decks, because it's not like 80% of people at a competitive tournament would show up with Turbo Discard, even though they could. For the most part, some people didn't like playing it or felt like they wanted to play other decks, and that's fine. But if you played a deck that was only really good against Turbo Discard, it would have pretty big problems against other decks. So EX Burst decks, if you don't hit an EX Burst, then you have to pay the full cost of the card. And the cards weren't always the most effective at every single turn. So if all you did was bank on the fact that your opponent's going to hit you, and what they do is play, for example, Water Wind, where they kind of build up a board, and after that they have really big spells and big summons and forwards that deal with your field, then all of a sudden you just fall flat on your face. While you kind of wish you went against it with this card to take it on, because your deck would have done a lot better against it. So it definitely limited the variety of decks that we saw around. I mean, obviously people could just show up with other decks, but the ones that actually make to the top cut, Turbo Discard made a very high percentage of the field. And the way I feel about this deck is it has a high floor and high ceiling, meaning that consistently, because it's mono ice, it doesn't run into any problems where it's like, well, okay, I didn't draw the right element, I can't pitch the card to get what I want out of it to actually play what I need. Now with mono ice, you're always able to play the card in your hand by pitching the cards in your hand. There's never like, oh, okay, well, I want to play a wind card, but I have one wind card, no wind backups, and all earth cards in my hand. All my other cards are earth cards in my hand, so I can't play that card right now. With Turbo Discard, it was always like, well, do I have enough to play it? That's it. Like there's no guessing of like anything else. So being a mono element deck, it was very consistent. And in terms of how many cards it had that would force you to discard, on top of having a Jesper and everything, I'll go over Jesper and why. Another reason why it's so good is that like it was just very, very consistent. And there's times when you drew things that would do a triple discard out of your opponent's hand, and it did it so consistently that, I mean, the ceiling is, I guess you could say, being able to discard 3 cards out of your opponent's hand. I mean, getting 1 Thaumaturge or 2 in the first turn is good, but if you watch the evolution of the deck, it went from, okay, well, we have Thaumaturges, Jaspers, Sid Alstein, and Genesis and things like that, and that was already really good. Okay, that was a more aggressive, a different take on the mid-range ice that we saw come out of, like, I think it was Europe and a little bit around, where they did more of the Flan and Sid Alstein. But when Turbo Discard came out, it was like, well, it's fairly easy to pilot, it's fairly consistent, and the ceiling goes even higher, and you don't run out of ways to discard of your opponent's hand once you get a Jesper in the field. So that was a big deal. The Jesper on the field being able to, turn after turn, force your opponent to discard a card from their hand meant that you never ran out of, I guess you could say, gas, because normally your deck plays pretty well without any cards in hand. Like, you don't mind because Thaumaturges or Genesis and things like that, like your deck will actually not need to put that many backups, because your early game is what you go for, and normally when you play an aggressive deck, eventually you run out of gas. You know, like, oh, I run out of cards to play. You know, I can't deal with the fact that my opponent is drawing more cards, building up their board, taking a couple points of damage, stabilizing, and overpowering my cards. Now, with Jesper, what happened was that, well, turn after turn, you would force cards out of your opponent's hand. You would force them to go in somewhat of a top deck mode. If you kept going very aggressive, you would play out all your cards, and with no cards in hand, you would force a Jesper activation. You would lose no cards in your hand, and then your opponent would lose a card. So it would force them to always play cards, and if they did always play cards, then in turn, Thaumaturge was a 5k power forward. And keep in mind that 5k is a big deal because a lot of other effects like to deal about 4,000 damage. 5,000, I mean, you could see a few, like there was Vivi, and I think, was it Black Waltz? No, it was something else, but let's see. Well, it was like a fire backup, so you know what, let me look up fire backup, take a look. Okay, there's a lot of them, obviously. It was, well, Vivi was one of the answers, you know, well, EX burst on top of that, but people were not playing that much fire because fire felt, it did not do well against other decks. I mean, Dalaluma still being a big part of the meta, if you were to use a lot of damaging effects to fight your way through forwards, you'd be in trouble. Another answer was Black Mage. So, like I said, it's fire. That's the problem. Like, fire, and even then, I mean, it would force only maybe a few decks to stay at the top to be able to take on Turbo Discard. That was just way too consistent. Let me think what else I was going to talk about. Oh, and after that, the deck evolved. If you watched Jordan deck over at Gen Con, that's when Jordan brought in the Deep Ground Soldiers, which I always thought were pretty interesting cards. And let's see, maybe I need to write it down. Deep Ground Soldier. Yeah, don't watch my bad spelling, please. That's a little embarrassing. Okay, so you got, come on, Deep Ground Soldier. So what was interesting about it is even forced this deck to be even more consistent, because normally, okay, well, my deck is only very consistent if I get Thaumaturges out, Jesper. I mean, it was really good already. But with Deep Ground Soldier and Jesper, what happens is that, okay, let's say you go close to empty-handed, you have a Jesper on the field, you have a Deep Ground Soldier, you play your Deep Ground Soldier, and after that, when you have no cards in hand, you activate your Jesper, force your opponent to discard a card. Your Deep Ground Soldier enters a trigger that was on the stack. So, okay, you play Deep Ground Soldier, ability on the stack, you use a Jesper activation on top of Deep Ground Soldier. You have no cards in hand. You force your opponent to discard a card from their hand. Then you go through your deck and you get a card. So you actually are up a card, have a forward out. Your opponent just discards one card, and you just keep pushing your board state forward. And Deep Ground Soldier would go into the 3-drop, which would go into the 4-drop, and the 4-drop also gives plus 2,000 power to standard units, which include all the Deep Ground Soldiers, as well as, guess what? Thaumaturge was also a standard unit. So that was a complete nightmare. And if you watch the evolution that came out from the North America Championship, was that people started adding Sephiroth, which made you even more likely to get that turn 1 discard up to a total of 3 cards out of your opponent's hand, which was just really devastating. Okay, and so talking about the ban list, people were discussing, well, were there other ways to go about it? Okay, so some people mentioned, well, shoot, I don't have that card out right now. Let me think. Yeah, it's gonna take too long. But in the chapter series of the game, which was the previous iteration of the game. Okay, the game had something called chapter series before, and then eventually some of the cards got a little out of hand, power creeped and everything. And I think chapters was isolated to Japan. So when Square Enix and Hobby Japan decided to go with the worldwide launch, they kind of did a reboot of the game. They created the Opus series instead, and here we are now at Opus 7. Okay, so throughout Opus 6, we've watched this deck, the Turbo Discard, being not only quite potent in competitive play. I mean, I can't even count how many people got qualifications by using Turbo Discard to get to the North America Championship, but he actually won the North America Championship on top of that, and it was just, whew, yeah, it was rough. I mean, that deck is really, really strong. Even when people knew they'd be playing against it, best of 3, like it was just not easy to actually just knock it out with any kind of counters. So I feel like Square Enix and Hobby Japan took their time to consider this, and I mean all of Opus 6 was there to actually kind of gather a bunch of data to see, are there other ways to go about it? And if you look back at the history of the game, when from Opus 1 to now, people have been clamoring for different bans at different times. And if you go back to Opus 1, Golbez was a big deal. And I mean, people would play turn 1 Golbez, and after that they would find a way to break him with 3-drop Delita or something like that, and get a bunch of 2 CP forwards out. And this was kind of a big deal, and people were like, well, should we ban Golbez? And after that, people were thinking about, well, maybe there's other cards that are just really detrimental to other people kind of putting decks together. Should we ban Minwu? And that didn't happen either. And after that, people were thinking, well, there's other cards that are not very fun. Should we ban Shantoto? Is that effect too strong? And that didn't happen either. And even when Al Cid came out in Opus 2 and was just devastating, and I'm not sure if it was an official response or not regarding to Al Cid, but the fact that you're able to play a lightning forward of cost 3 or less, some people have mentioned that this was a bit of a misprint, that he was not supposed to bring out lightning forwards. It was supposed to be anything but lightning, because if you look at some of the other cards that came out in Opus 2, which Al Cid did, there were judges, and a lot of the cards specifically say, except for its own element. For right here with Zagabrath, it's except for ice. And if you look up, Gis is right here, any element except for water, and even that didn't get banned. Okay, and so I strongly believe that this was a right move, at least for now, until an answer is able to be printed that comes out that evens it out a little bit more. I do like the idea of bans over the idea of erratas, because while it's okay to have it's tough, okay, to have a ban list. You have to make sure that the players are updated on what happens. But if you make an errata, that's not just a small misprint. I mean, there have been misprints. There have been erratas, such as well, I don't know if I have a copy of the original Zidane, as it was set to come out, but Zidane actually had a bit of a misprint on it too initially, where it didn't state that it was, let me see, what does it say? Right here. It didn't say one win character. It said anything, and people were thinking about like, hey, you know what? Let's put Jesper and Zidane together, force card out of opponent's hand, reactivate it, and again and again and again. And I mean, that would have been just completely devastating to be able to use a 2-card combination to get all the cards out of your opponent's hand. Okay, so good thing that this was put in place, but it's not often, like, I'm sure that they try to avoid misprints. Obviously, like no card company wants to put the wrong information on the card, but when it comes to a ban over errata, I mean, imagine if like some people had made the argument where, what if Jasper said something like, Dole, you discard a card. If you do so, your opponent discard a card. That's nice, but then when you look at the card and you try to read it and take it for what the text says, like that's like a last-ditch effort to me to actually have to errata something. That, to me, that is above the level of a ban. If you have to change the text on a card to be something completely different, it completely alters the card. While if you ban it, at least you could still play it in other things. Like Title Series is starting to pick up steam, in my opinion. I really like the format, and if you were to errata Jesper and Thaumaturge, they would be errata across all formats. If you do a ban list, at least you ban it for a format that you want, in this case standard constructed, and you can kind of move on. So how do I feel about it? I feel it's alright. Keep in mind that ban list can be updated. If they ever print a different answer, a good counter to Jesper and Thaumaturge, they can go ahead and put them back into the wild where they're no longer banned, and maybe we'll have to wait for that. And another thing to keep in mind is that when a card company makes cards, it's not as if like all of a sudden, oh look, this is a problem, let me print out a counter to it in a month or two. It takes a long time to design a set, to design cards, to test them out, and to actually go out there and get them printed to a larger amount so you can put them out to the wild, get them available to the players, and then send them out to the distributors, who send them out to the store, who get them to the players. So from what I understand, the sets are designed about 2 sets ahead of where we are now, maybe 3. So when people say, hey, we noticed that at the very end of Opus 5, coming to Opus 6, Jesper and Thaumaturge were a problem, they should print an answer to it so that it comes out in Opus 7. That's not possible. By the time you're playing with Opus 6, Opus 7 is already being printed, if not already printed. So unfortunately, the ban had to happen. I'm not too sad about it, because playing at locals, you could definitely see that people either decided, like, you know what, we don't want to play to put this card against each other, so let's not even bring it out here to our weekly tournaments, our local tournaments, so that people could go out and have fun, especially new players. Because if a bunch of people bring out Turbo Discard, a lot of new players would look at it like, yes, it is somewhat affordable to put together, which is fine, but over time, what we noticed is a lot of players didn't like playing the deck, and they like playing against the deck. So it was not fun, and that's definitely something that the Hobby Japan and Square Enix team both kind of discussed over here, that it was not fun to play. It wasn't impossible to stop, but it was quite powerful, and it was detrimental to the game. Okay, so maybe they didn't. Maybe I'm like paraphrasing what it says, but I will have to agree with them that I noticed a lot of people were not having as much fun with the game when they knew that Turbo Discard was there. It was always a point of discussion coming into the North America Championship, kind of seeing it over in Europe as it led up to the, to the big Europe tournament that just happened recently. And fortunately, at least for Worlds, which is a little bit of a point of debate, this ban will not be put into place and be effective when Worlds happens in, I think it's just a couple weeks. So one of the reasons why I'm okay with it personally is that if you told people that we're playtesting a lot because they're going to Worlds, that you have 2 weeks to figure out what everything would look, what the meta would look like if these two cards didn't even exist, is very short notice. And to some of the other people that say, well, why didn't they just wait until after Worlds to talk about this ban, is that I'm okay with the fact that they did this now, because it gives the players a bit of time, at least the casuals and the locals and whatever, a bit of time to kind of plan around it, deck build and test, so that if any events were to come up in December or January, they would have plenty of time to get used to the fact that these cards are no longer part of Standard Constructed. So let me know what you guys think. This video will be up on YouTube a little shortly. I'll try to get it up so that cleaned up a little bit so that it's up. Feel free to put your comments and questions down below. I mean, I'm sure that it's a topic that might rub people the wrong way. Some people are clamoring for this. I think this was a wise decision. Do I feel like there would have been other ways to go around it? Like, perhaps, but this is the decision that was made, and unfortunately, a counter was not able to come out in force in Opus 6 or Opus 7, and in order to allow the game to grow and to not turn players away from the fact that the majority of the people that I saw play the deck or play against the deck were not really enjoying it as much, because I feel that most players enjoyed kind of homebrewing or playing other decks, and Jesper and Thaumaturge were so devastating, on top of the fact that there are that's a resource denial deck where you don't even get to play the card or try to play the card that you want to play, because they will finish a game quite quickly, and they will force you to discard the cards that you think would be pretty cool to play. On top of the fact that it turned the game into so much of a who wins the roll of the dice and who draws the best, who top decks better, who draws the best cards within the first couple, like 3 to 4 turns. And if you're not lucky enough, even if you deck build to kind of tilt the odds in your favor, like Turbo Discard could still come out on top, even if you built around it on a pretty good basis. So let us know what you think over in the comments down below, and yeah, subscribe. Otherwise, thank you for MagicGames.com for being our sponsor. When we reach 800 subscribers, we'll be doing a giveaway. Subscriber at random will be chosen, and they'll get to pick between one of the following things that we give away, that we'll be giving to them. A Mox Amber from Dominaria, Horizon Canopy from Iconic Masters, Cactuar character sleeves, 1 pack of 60, Lightning plushie, and a Shiva deck box from the Toronto Crystal Cup with Taru Kageyama's autograph signature at the back. So that's the producer of the game, in case you don't know. So hopefully you enjoy this, and I'm going to take a short break, and in a couple minutes I'll be back to start off on a bit more of a fun topic, the Lightning review for Opus 7. So we'll catch you guys in just a bit.